Carrie Cantino, and I'm an occupational therapist with the Pembroke Public Schools. In conjunction with Catherine Jarrett, the physical therapist, and Jennifer Farron, another occupational therapist with the Pembroke Public Schools, we've developed a series of videos to help you, the teacher, help the kids in your class that may be struggling with fine motor or gross motor skills. In today's video, we will be discussing fine motor skills and the stages of development and how they relate to school. We'll also be talking about examples of functional grasps that kids use when they're writing. And lastly, we'll be talking about incorporating fine motor activities into your everyday classroom. I'm now going to briefly discuss the stages of fine motor development in the school setting. It's important to remember that in today's day and age, we are asking children to do a lot of things that their hands are just not ready to do. It's not like it was 20 years ago, where they weren't even asked to write a letter until first grade. Kids are expected to write every letter of the alphabet by the time they leave kindergarten. We've also seen an increase in children with fine motor difficulties since the initiation of the Back to Sleep campaign. Children, as babies, are on their backs a lot. And if they're not given enough tummy time, they may not crawl. And when they're not crawling, they're not developing their muscles that they need for writing later on. So when thinking about the stages of development, the first thing that's really important to remember is that it starts from the trunk of your body and then works its way out. So babies, as they're starting to go through development, start by, first they're on their backs and they're really crunched together. Then they start reaching for things and they're working on their shoulder muscles. Then they get up on all fours and they start crawling, all before a lot of fine motor development starts to happen. This is important because if a child skips any of those stages when they're babies, they may have fine motor difficulties as they get older. So those are kids you want to go back to our first video when we talked about some gross motor activities you could be doing, like crab walking and things like that, that will help build their muscles in their trunk. Once they have the appropriate muscles in their shoulders, then they can start learning some more fine motor activities. The first thing we want to also think about is pencil grip. The stages of pencil grip, you'd be surprised that when kids are between the ages of 3.5 and 4, they're not even supposed to be holding a pencil the right way. What they're supposed to do in the stages of development is they're supposed to have a fisted grasp and holding their wrist at neutral while they're coloring. That is appropriate for 3.5 to 4-year-olds. Between 4 and 5 is when children start to use a more fingered grasp. They're still not using a tripod or quadruped grasp. We'll talk about those in a minute. At the age of 4. So it's okay for your child when they're 4 years old to be holding it in a fisted grasp. And going from a fisted grasp to a fingered grasp. It's not between ages 5 and 6. And if we think about that, that's kindergarten age, is when children are really starting to develop an actual grasp they should be using when they're writing in school. So now we've talked about how kids should be holding their pencils by the time that they're 5 or 6. But a lot of people don't realize that there are different functional grasps. Not everybody holds their pencil the same way, and that's okay. The way we look at it as occupational therapists is, does the child really struggle? Are they getting really fatigued when they're writing? If they have an inefficient grasp, this might be the reason. So we try to encourage the correct grasp at between the ages of 5 and 6. I'm going to show you the 3 grasps that we consider functional grasps by the ages of 5 or 6. The first one is a tripod grasp, which a lot of you have probably heard about before. It's using your first 3 fingers on a pencil. So your thumb, your first finger, and your middle finger rest behind the pencil. And there's a nice open, we call it a web space. This is a functional tripod grasp. If you notice, you can easily move your fingers when you're in this grasp. The other functional grasp is a quadruped grasp. Quad, meaning 4, is when 4 fingers are actually touching the pencil. So again, your thumb, your index finger, your middle finger is actually on the pencil this time, and your ring finger is supporting it behind. This is also a very functional grasp. Again, you can move your fingers smoothly when you're writing in this grasp. Another grasp, which you would not think would be a functional grasp, but really is when the child holds it between their two first fingers and their thumb is supporting it. In this position, your thumb is getting more of a workout, but your thumb is the strongest muscle you have in your hand. So you are able to easily write, and it's an efficient grasp. Kids that have a fisted grasp by the time that they're 6, we should start to look at some activities that we can do to really get them to develop a better grasp. Another one that we see a lot is kids that hold with all 5 of their fingers. In this grasp, as you notice, I can't move my pencil very well at all. Another one is kids will kind of hold it so that their thumb is, we call, hyperextended, and their first finger is completely flexed. And again, if my thumb is hyperextended, I really can't get a good movement on my pencil. In these cases, when the child's in kindergarten or first grade, you want to do some fine motor activities, which we'll talk about in a minute, that will really help to develop the appropriate grasp. By the time the child is in the beginning of 2nd grade, around 7, the grasp they have, unfortunately, is going to be very difficult to change. And by that time, the child has probably become so used to holding it that way, it's going to do more harm trying to change it than it would just giving them breaks between their writing assignments. They may get a little more fatigued than another child that has an efficient grasp, but that's okay. Just give them an extra break. The other thing we do to help develop this grasp, especially with our preschool and kindergartners. In preschool, as I talked about earlier, you're really not even supposed to have the correct grasp until you're out of preschool. So with these children, they really, if you're having them write, they should be using golf pencils, which are just shortened pencils. I break all of my crayons for every one of my own children and the kids I work with. Always use short broken crayons. Crayola makes a good product now, and it's called Pipsqueak markers. These markers, again, are nice and shortened for small hands. I've also been able to find some dry erase markers that are also shortened. These are also good for the kids to use. When they're using these types of utensils, they can really start concentrating on getting at least a few fingers isolated for beginning writers. They can't use a fisted grasp in color. It's almost impossible, especially with the smaller broken crayons, because you can break it as small as you really need to try to help develop the pincer grasp or that tripod grasp to color. Again, they can't use a fisted grasp. The other thing we also use, we use these more with first graders that we've tried to change the grasps in preschool, kindergarten, not really getting much better, or it's a child that we were just brought in to look at, and these would be pencil grips. A lot of markers and pens and some pencils these days have a grip already built in them, and you as an adult may actually use those type and think that they are much more comfortable, because they really are. They help with the efficiency of writing. You don't have to have your fingers so close together. So kids, it's okay for them to use the pencil grips. This is just a standard grip. They have these a lot at Walmart, CVS, that kind of thing. What you want to do is you slide it on. It's a bigger grip. You can hold it. It gives you a little bit more surface. For children that are really struggling with the tripod grasp, we have, it's called the pencil grip, and this is my favorite grip that I recommend a lot. It looks like a little bulb. You just put your pencil in. It gives you a spot for one finger, a spot for your first finger, and then a spot for your third finger. It really helps to develop the tripod grasp. There are some kids that even giving this or this, they'll still revert to what they're so used to. Again, we're asking kids to do a lot of writing these days at early stages of development, and their fingers are just not ready. So as long as they're writing legibly, it's okay to not change their grasp completely. now we're going to talk about some activities that you can incorporate into your classroom to help children develop fine motor skills or to strengthen what they already have. These activities are good for anyone in your class, even those kids that you think have the best fine motor skills you've ever seen. Everybody can use a little tune-up. One thing you want to make sure is when you're doing an activity with a child, make sure they're using the right grip for what you're asking them to do. A lot of kids that may have a weakness in fine motor skills will revert back to a grasp that feels a little bit better for them and doesn't use the muscles that we're really trying to focus on. I'll try to go through, as I go through a few of the activities, and explain to you what muscles should be being used in certain activities. And hopefully this will help you monitor. You don't ever want to set up a station and then just walk away. Really just show the kids the appropriate way they should be holding whatever the utensil is you're using or the fine motor activity that you're using. The first thing I'm going to talk about is using tongs and clothespins. The first one is tongs. We get these through educational magazines a lot. They come in big buckets for your whole classroom, and the kids absolutely love the fish designs, and then there's animal design ones. This is one of the things that if a child has weakness in fine motor skills, they will revert to this grasp. You'll see them using this a lot. And they'll try to pick things up using this grasp. And it's not very efficient and not working the motor skills that we're really trying to work on. They should be holding it like they're going to hold a pencil. So again, I'm using a tripod grasp. There may be other kids that are going to use a quadruped grasp that we talked about earlier, and that's okay. What you want to make sure they have it in their, the web space is right here. You want to make sure that it's in the web space. And they're just picking things up and moving it. You can use this at a math center where they're having to count small items or doing addition. If they're doing a math paper and it's 4 plus 2 and they have little manipulatives, they can count out 4 with these and then add 2 more. You can use these a lot during math lessons. Another thing I like to do with these is taking small items. They could be small erasers. I like using those a lot. And on this paper I have the start of my name. And what you do is you just have the kids use the tongs to trace their name all the way down with whatever materials you feel like having them use. You can use this when they're working on their name or when they're working on certain letter and letter formations, which we'll talk about in our next series of videos. So that is the tongs. Another thing we like to do is using clothespins. When you're using clothespins, again, you'll see kids that try to use different grasps that are really not efficient and not what we're looking for. Again, you want to make sure that they're using, this is actually more of a pincer grasp activity. So you're going to have them pinch and put clothespins just on a container. This is a really steady container for it. Another thing I do a lot is I'll put letters that we're working on the clothespin and have them have to try to spell out words. Sometimes they'll spell out their spelling words or sight words or things like that using the clothespins. So if it's the word, I think I have, let's see, a word that I have in here. It's the word done. So I can spell out D-O-N-E. And now I'm done showing you the clothespins. The next activity you can try with your kids is using Play-Doh. Play-Doh is a great strengthening activity for so many things, but some ways of really getting them to work on the fine motor skill they're going to need for writing later on is taking your Play-Doh and rolling it out. And then again, using that tripod or quadruped grasp that they're using on their pencil, they're pinching the Play-Doh all the way down. They're trying to keep these 2 fingers in while they're really pinching all the way down the Play-Doh, and then rolling it out and doing it again. Another thing you can do with Play-Doh is take small pieces and make little teeny balls with them. Kids love this activity, especially if another child is on the other end of the table. So they make a bunch of small ones, and then they use a flicking to flick them across the table. Kids love chasing those. They can play little hockey games with them too. Another thing we'll talk about with Play-Doh later in our next series of videos is also using it to make letters and letter formations, but we will talk about that later. You can use building blocks. and crinkling paper. So you would just take a piece of paper and you're going to have the kids tear it. And when they're tearing it, you'll notice that a lot of kids will try to tear with their fingers like this. We don't want them to tear like that. I tell the kids, here's my alligator fingers. I want it to look like an alligator mouth when I'm pinching and I'm tearing. So I'm pinching with my alligators. One alligator goes forward and one alligator goes back. And I'm really tearing the paper and then using those same alligators' mouths to crinkle up my paper. You can do this with tissue paper or regular paper. So that's another idea. Another thing is using scissors. Scissors, a lot of kids will try to cram all of their fingers into that big hole, or they'll do the opposite and put one finger in the little hole and their thumb in the big hole. These are both inefficient ways to use scissors. The idea of scissors is you want to have your two middle fingers in the big hole, your thumb in the little hole, and a guider finger guiding the scissors along the way. This helps the child keep the scissors in control while trying to cut things out. You can use scissors as a strengthening tool also. If you have heavier paper, maybe cardstock or even construction paper is heavier than regular paper and will give them more strength. You could also have them cut Play-Doh and practice cutting the Play-Doh. Again, this will just help to strengthen their finger muscles. Another thing we like to do a lot with our kids is writing on a vertical surface. Use the whiteboards in your room when they're doing coloring or writing activities. Right up on the whiteboard. Again, they're working on their shoulder muscles, their wrist extension, and they're writing on the board. You could also use a 3-ring binder. Usually I say about 3 inches for a 3-ring binder is a good size for kids to use when they're practicing writing or coloring at their desk. Squirt bottles is another fun activity to use. These are good. This is good to use on nice days. You can bring your whole class outside, and there's a game that I like to play with squirt bottles, and it's called Melt the Monster. So kids, again, up on a vertical surface with washable markers, they need to draw out a monster. And then they each take turns melting the monster with the squirt bottle. When they're holding the squirt bottle, again, you want to make sure they're using their first 3 fingers and the other ones are tucked behind. This is really good for strengthening those muscles. Flipping pennies. Actually today I just had a group and we did flipping penny race. So they all start with a certain amount of pennies in front of them and they're using just their pincer grasp to flip each penny over one at a time. You could do it as a race, but you could also do it when they're trying to learn letters. So right now I have a W on this page. So I'm going to put all of my pennies face up on the W. And they have to go and flip them over one at a time as if they were drawing the W themselves. And they would flip it over. So that's another good activity. Also in your classrooms, stringing beads. Like to make necklaces or bookmarks or things with beads. That's another great activity you can try. Theraputty is a lot like the Play-Doh, but it's a little bit thicker and more resistive. You could also use silly putty. It's a little bit thicker too, but what kids love to do with this is actually hide pennies inside your putty or your Play-Doh and have them trying to find each one. If you hide 5, make sure they find all 5 before they put the Play-Doh away. This works on their hand strength too. Hole punches are another great activity you can use. You can have them have to hole punch a circle or hole punch their name or other things with the hole punch. Again, you want to make sure you monitor your activities. Don't just set it up and walk away, but really explain to the kids how they should be holding the utensils or the things that they're doing. One other one I forgot to mention today is jacks. One thing, jacks or tops, you can have the kids actually spin them and have games and see who's last the longest, or have little battles between tops or jacks. That's another really good activity. When in doubt, you can always ask the occupational or physical therapist for some ideas that will help you to incorporate any fine motor or gross motor activity into your classroom environment.